All right, so today with us, we have a number of people to help discuss vine mealybug. We know this is a big issue for Oregon growers. Over the last couple of years, became on our radar, being in the state, and it is a quarantine pest. And please, when we go through the presentation today, please, as I mentioned before, use the Q&A so I can bring up questions that you might have. I notice a few questions already in the chat box. Please put them over in the Q&A section. But to start off, I want to just reintroduce myself. I'm Patty Skinkis. I'm the Viticulture Extension Specialist at Oregon State University. And we invited a couple different people here today as I'm hosting this webinar to showcase topical issues that are really important to get out to the grower industry, the wine grape industry. So we invited Josh Vlach. So Josh is an entomologist with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Many of you have probably seen Josh present in a couple different forums for the Oregon wine industry, namely at the Oregon Wine Symposium up in Portland for a couple of years now, and also interacted with him on various other quarantine discussions over the years and tech group meetings. So we're very happy to have Josh join us today to talk about the specific role that he's leading within the entomology team and the pest management team at Oregon Department of Agriculture to help us manage and understand where the vine mealybug is located. Now, we have a couple of other people joining us today as well, although Josh is our main featured speaker. We also have Alexander Levin from our Southern Oregon Research and Extension Center. He's the Associate Professor of Viticulture as well as Director of that station. And he's been at the forefront of working with both the ODA and OSU on helping manage the vine mealybug situation in Southern Oregon. And also we have Dr. Von Walton, who is based here on main campus, who is our extension entomologist, and works with many different crops, not just grapes, but he also has expertise in mealybugs, specifically vine mealybugs. So Dr. Alec Levin, Dr. Von Walton are also on to address questions as needed when they come up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Josh. Josh, feel free to start. And if you have questions, as I mentioned before, please use the Q&A and I'll keep track of those as they come in.
All right, I'm not muted, am I? I can't see the little thing anymore.
Yep, you're on. You're ready to go.
Excellent. Hey, I'm Josh Vlach, entomologist at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Just as a little background, mostly at the ODA, we're dealing with invasive species issues, especially new pests to the state of Oregon, and trying to either prevent them from arriving or preventing them from establishing, or mitigating them once they're here, which is what vine mealybug would kind of fall into. It's here. So just a little background on some of our work. We really started keeping track of invasive species in 2007. So since 2007, there's been 181 new invasive species or exotic species established in Oregon. So don't feel alone. Vine mealybug is not an unusual occurrence, unfortunately. Happens to lots of other commodities too as well. And so this is having a pretty regular rate of almost 10 species per year. And you can kind of see, this isn't necessarily when they're coming in, but this is when we're detecting them. So you can see like it ranges a lot. 2015, 25 species were found and a low of 4 in 2013. And so a lot of variability. 2023 was a low year with only 5, which is good, I guess. And so, a lot of those things, we don't really know what they're going to do. They aren't known to be pests in other places, but about 1 in 5 of them were known to be pests when they arrived. Vine mealybug would be one of those pests that would fit that description. So, like I said, unfortunately, a pretty common occurrence. So just a little background, so there are other mealybugs on grape, right? Grape mealybug's been spread pretty widely around the state. And so that's probably what people were familiar with dealing with. That's one in the green box in the lower left-hand corner. Less commonly, there's long-tailed mealybug and there's obscure mealybugs. And then in 2014, we had the Gill's mealybug introduced, which attacks a variety of things as well. But it has these very distinctive little wax rods, almost look kind of like glass. And the mealybugs that were here before have long tails. Um, Great mealybug's tail is usually not longer than the width of its body, but they're waxen, so they break off, so it's kind of difficult to say. But so now, right, we're talking about vine mealybug. So vine mealybug and Gill's mealybug are only known in Jackson County. So, like I said, in 2021, this was detected in Jackson County and just a few traps that were placed in some vineyards there, two sites. And so the wine board funded a delimitation survey to find out how far and wide they were spread. So about 300 trap sites. In the course of that summer, we got over 25,000 male vine mealybugs in traps. So that was disappointing. That was more than we'd hoped. And then in 2023, using both that funding and legislative funding that came in that new biennium, um, we were able to do a number of things. One was to continue the Jackson County delimitations. The other was to um, for the quarantine and the adjacent properties, we were able to treat it, and that was something that OSU was able to arrange getting both mating disruption products and Movento and do treatments on those in 2023. And then we had funds to do a statewide survey, right? Because we need to know how widespread this is. Are we dealing with really a spot infestation in Jackson County, or is it more widespread? And so the voluntary survey was used because we could get it started the fastest. So did at least 74 vineyards in basically the counties you want us to do it in, the ones that are growing grapes. And unfortunately, we had detections in Douglas County and Lynn County. So just a little background. So that's the female vine mealybug, right, is on the left there, the waxy little critter here with its tails are very short, right? They're not even half as long as the body is wide, if that makes sense. So you can pretty readily discern it from like say the grape mealybug. But this thing obviously can't travel very far. It does have legs and it can walk, and the crawlers can walk, but things that go to the traps are the males. The males can fly. They're actually actively out there hunting for females to mate. And so we use the pheromone to basically trick them into going into a trap where we can monitor them. And so we've been using, they don't have to use Sutera, but we were using red delta traps. Based on that 2023 data, we found that these cardboard traps on the left work better in terms of not catching non-target mealybug males. Whereas since these are so open, other mealybug types will just fly in there by accident if they're in large numbers. And having the ends closed up and having this smaller opening made it so like this, if you were seeing mealybugs in these cardboard traps, you could be almost certain that they were vine mealybug because they were working to get inside. So here's a trap. I think it had like 585 mealybugs on it. And so each of these little specks in here are one of these little males stuck in the goo. So you don't want to see that in your vineyard, preferably. That's quite a few. But the good news was, so right in 2023, we did treatment, or the vineyards did treatments with OSU's help. And so we trapped 359 sites in the delimitation around that area, and we caught 0 vine mealybugs. And so, well, that doesn't mean that they're eradicated or anything, but it did really reduce their populations and render them basically undetectable. So it's very promising, right? So in general, good news. And so yeah, real quick, why are we talking about this? I mean, hopefully you guys are aware or have talked to folks in California that deal with this. Now, this is pretty extreme, this paper, this Ricketts paper, but it's pretty interesting, because they looked at long-term costs, like in terms of the loss of production of vines that were infested with a leaf roll virus that were taken out of production. And so those losses, so then it caused the losses per acre to be very high, right? $12,000 and more. Now, basically what we've seen, the cost of having this thing become established is going to be, at least hundreds of dollars per year per acre. So fairly significant cost increases. the main reason that the mealybug, if it didn't transmit the virus, would probably be a pretty minor pest, but the transmitting the virus, the leaf roll virus, is what makes it a significant pest. So the questions I was kind of anticipating answering for this, the ones I'm getting anyway, are what are you finding? And what if vine mealybug is found in my vineyard? So, right, for 2024, we still have the legislative funding. It was for the whole biennium. And so we've got the statewide survey, but this time it's ODA led, where we put out 20 to 30,000 traps per year for other target species. And so our field technicians that we have do that work are putting out the vine mealybug traps as part of their work. So we're trying to get a good coverage of the state. And then we have delimitations, trapping efforts in Jackson County, Douglas County, and Lynn County, around all the positive detections we've had so far. All the known positive sites were treated this year. And there was that funding from the legislature also had money for reimbursement for the quarantine properties. And so all of them did, a Movento treatment and then season-long mating disruption, or are doing it, right? Still in the process of mating disruption. And so everything's been treated. So, it'll be really interesting to see what we find this year. And unfortunately, so as far as results, I don't really have any. So the traps are coming into the lab. They are beginning to be processed, but I don't really have any positive results. And hopefully it was really clear that the stuff that we get for the regulatory purposes are not going to be that useful for in-season management. So hopefully nobody's waiting for notification so they could treat or to take some action. I mean, unfortunately, these are merely we're monitoring on a big scale. And like I said, we've got, we're surveying for 35 or 40 other species. And so they're kind of mixed into our survey process. And we'll have them done by the end of the year probably, but not in a timely fashion for treatment or anything like that. So,
So I just want to bring up one of the questions that came up from Mike. He said, what is the treatment? And I think he's referring to the treatment. If you want to talk a little bit more about in those delimitation sites, what exactly the treatment is.
okay. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. We're going with what OSU had been suggesting. So right now it's a single Movento treatment at bud break, I believe. And so that's usually what is that? I don't know what time that was this year. It's like mid-May, maybe. It would depend on where you are in the state, obviously. Um, and then the mating disruption they can be a number of products, but they're either little hangers you put out in the field, mostly. And so basically, the sooner you can get those out in the field, so basically you could start at the beginning of the season when you do the treatment, maybe even before. But in May, basically put them out, hang them out. And I think all the ones we had available were season long, so I think you only had to do it once. So it was a pretty convenient product. That's pretty much it. And the next day is that you keep that treatment out for until September, or basically when your traps would show that they stopped flying. But I'd say certainly through September, but maybe even in October would be a good idea.
And just to clarify, the Movento treatment was to the grapevines itself,
Yes,
not
it's a
the soil
systemic
or anything.
insecticide, and we weren't treating any other intentionally. They weren't advised to treat other plant types. It was just the vineyard, just the grapevines.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So hopefully on this thing, there's not too much confusion. So, vine mealybug is part of the Great Pests and Diseases quarantine. So when it's detected on a property, this quarantine is set up so that that property is immediately quarantined when it's detected. And so the way that we're triggering that quarantine is so it's basically two ways it can happen on your property. So if you're growing grapevines and you catch 10 or more male vine mealybug in a trap, then you can be quarantined. Or if you're growing grapevines and you're adjacent to a property that is known to be infested, then all you have to have is one vine mealybug in a trap. Otherwise, if you're far from anybody else that's infested and you catch less than 10 mealybugs, you're not going to be quarantined at this time. Although the plan would be to come back and do delimitation trapping, right? Additional trapping to figure out perhaps where the source of the infestation is, or where is the center of the infestation? Is it actually coming from near the facility that this trap is placed on? And I will note that the quarantine does not prohibit the sale of grapes.
So one
Because
of the
the quarantine,
questions,
the purpose of it,
okay,
right,
go ahead.
is oh, hey,
Yeah, you're getting to it right now. So go
oh,
ahead. That was the question was what if it doesn't prevent the sale of grapes, what exactly is a quarantine? So you're getting to that. That's perfect.
oh,
Go
okay.
ahead.
It's a big picture kind of protection, right? This is for the state. It was initiated to help prevent this thing from being even introduced in the state in the first place, right? It had requirements for the scion material that was being brought into the state. Obviously, some infested material made it past that quarantine for whatever reason. But and so now it's a matter of, can we contain it to a small area or better? And so by not allowing it to spread, you're going to reduce the amount of pesticides that are used across the state versus, being allowed to spread freely. Because in California, it spread across the entire state of California in just a few years. And so we would like to prevent that from happening. Um, Also, the disease basically takes vines out of production, right? And I believe it's 3 to 5 years, then basically the um, the grapes the vines produce generally aren't good for wine production. So you've essentially lost those. That's another significant cost. And while we haven't necessarily seen this yet, but it avoids any trade barriers that maybe if Washington wanted to restrict the movement of material or grapes up into Washington, if we don't have it around the state, right? We're taking action. And so like a treated vineyard, the population is going to be very suppressed if it's still present. And so the chances of, say, the grapes that are being exported will be much less, right? There shouldn't be as many crawlers, if any. And so it should be a much safer thing rather than an untreated or unmonitored property. And so people do get nervous about the idea of being quarantined. But as I've said before, there are thousands of properties across the state that are quarantined for various pests and various issues. So it's really not an uncommon thing. You just don't hear about it because it doesn't make the news or anything. Um, but basically, the quarantines will require that you're treating to suppress the pest. Um, and I can send, I'd be glad to send anybody the quarantine language if they want. No, basically, on an individual vineyard, it doesn't allow it. You're not supposed to move potentially infested material off site. So if you're trimming plants or um, digging up plants or whatever, any grape material isn't supposed to be moved off site. Uh, Preferably, these things would be buried or burned. And then you're going to want to make sure that all your equipment and tools are cleaned. Preferably with the equipment, you're going to want to like pressure wash it or steam clean it. So you don't want to spread that to new vineyards using machinery. That's a way to vector this stuff. And you want to ensure that workers are sanitized. The crawlers are very small and can get on things. The adults have the wax is kind of sticky, so they should ideally would be wearing some sort of outerwear that they could change when they move to new fields. Checking themselves to make sure they're not carrying stuff. They make sure hand tools are clean. The bins, try to avoid moving bins from an infested vineyard to a not infested vineyard. And if you need to move it, to wash it with soap and water. And notifying the next is notifying facilities that are receiving the grapes. So if you've sold your grapes to a winery, let them know that they're receiving grapes that are from a vineyard that is known to have vine mealybug. And this is because a lot of wineries have host material nearby, right? A lot of wineries have associated vineyards or at least some grapes, and so having that host material, you don't want them to get the material, set it aside near that material, and get that infested. So you have another infestation starting somewhere else that wasn't there before. And so that's what that's trying to protect from. And we're also asking to have the grapes moved in an enclosed or covered truck. That's because there are certainly other instances with other pests where these crawlers are very small and they potentially could blow out. And these things have a huge host range. So potentially they could find host material that they could survive on along a road, or if you're driving down amongst a bunch of vineyards or something. Um, and the other reason for notification is to safeguard the fermented pomace, that one. Um, so because that wax is water resistant, hydrophobic. When they're crushed and not fermented, the grapes these mealybugs can sometimes survive that treatment. And so it'd be another thing where we don't want this unfermented pumice to be set by grapevines and potentially infesting them. And so this material should be covered like black plastic, although I think we've also said that it could go to a landfill, would be possible too. So the next logical question is, so if I do get quarantined, like how do I get it removed? So basically that you need 3 consecutive years of negative trap results for that facility. And so because the mating disruption is also disruptive to the trapping, right? It's using basically the pheromone just like the trap does. The third year would have to be conducted in the absence of a mating disruption program in order. Otherwise, we can't be sure, whether we're getting negatives because they're not there or they're getting negatives because they're being the mating disruptions overwhelming the trap lures. And so that's pretty much the fundamental thing. And I would note, so that, as we move forward, these things are going to change over time. I mean, if we find that it is contained to just the sites we know for now, I mean, that's going to be a very different thing than if we start finding positive sites in the North Valley or North Willamette Valley or something like that. And so, this quarantine was made in cooperation with OSU and ODA and the growing community. So that's the way it would be changed is at that level as well. It's a rule that has to be changed by a process. So as it stands right
So
now,
before
2025,
you
we should.
go on, Josh, I wanted to ask a few more questions that came in about quarantines.
Sure.
So um, when it comes to the quarantine, is it voluntary? So how does one enact the quarantine?
So it is a little different quarantine in that so as soon as the pest is identified on a property, the property is technically quarantined. Um, so is it voluntary? In a sense? I mean, ODA doesn't have staff to go around and police and make sure that you're cleaning your trucks and that your workers, I mean, the odds of that happening are near zero, unfortunately. Um, so it is kind of on the honor system. Um, so how much enforcement is there? How mandatory is it? I mean, it is required. It's required by law, and if you're caught not doing it, I believe there's fines involved and stuff like that. But it'd be pretty unlikely for that to happen.
So it's more of kind of just safeguarding your own vineyard and the health of other vineyards to prevent the movement. And that I think is the kind of there's always the regulatory part of this, but there's also the kind of purpose that Josh already talked about, which is just trying to prevent spread. It's not just to slap restrictions on everybody, but to recognize, let's take care of a problem before it gets worse, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yep,
mean, it's in everybody's best interest to spend less money on pesticides and have less pesticides on wine grapes. So
yep. All right, go ahead. You can
sure.
well, there's more questions, but we'll come back to them at a kind of I think towards the end.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
So as of right now, so that biennial funding expires at the end of June, right? The bienniums go July to June. It's 2 years, right, in Oregon. And so we should still have funds to start the statewide survey again, start the limitations. We should have funds to do all the sites that we know of right now and to reimburse vineyards again for treatments in the spring. So we should be in a pretty good place, although then those funds will be gone and we don't have any replacements. But so those are discussions that the industry will want to have and how do we want to proceed after this point? But a lot of that will be determined, I think, by what we find this year. Find a lot or find a little. That'll make a big difference in what we think is the best path forward, probably. And so I would know, that these quarantine rules or the requirements, like they didn't come out of thin air. They were Patty and Vaughn and them back in 2009 put out guidelines to prevent the spread of leaf roll virus. So basically, it's largely these best practices that it's basically enforcing best practices. So I strongly encourage everybody to do this. This would protect it. There are going to be other pests coming through. There are going to be other pathogens coming through. There are a number of different leaf roll viruses. So just these kind of things can help prevent getting more than one version of leaf roll virus into the state. So, making sure the people, plant material, and machinery that enter your facility are clean, mean, that's, protect your area. Um, it could also, it has hundreds of hosts, vine mealybug, so keep in mind that whatever you bring on your facility, make sure that they're clean because landscaping plants could also be a potential pathway. Um, and there is risk of moving on grape clusters, so be aware of the unfermented grape crushes and keep and make sure you notify folks that are receiving potentially infested material and think about it when you're bringing material onto your site. Not everywhere has been trapped yet. Are the people that are shipping the stuff, have they been trapping? Are they aware of what they have? But basically, for the community's sake, report it if you find it. So I just threw these in here. Gill's mealybug is spreading also, and so there's some survey protocols you can recognize Gill's mealybug. But down in the bottom, if you go to the ODA website and you type in Oregon Department of Agriculture and vine mealybug, you also find a pest alert. So that's really all I had. It's pretty straightforward, sort of.
So that's good because we have a lot of questions, and I think this will leave a good amount of time for the questions to come in from the audience as well. So please do use that Q&A feature. So Vaughn and Alec, feel free to turn on your videos. And I see that Vaughn mentioned that he would like to help address the first question. And some of this you covered, Josh. So this is one of the biggest questions I've heard as well is what happens when a mealybug is found in the ODA traps? So the traps you put out this year in 2024 that may not be directly in a vineyard. So can you talk a little bit about where some of those traps went out? And if they're in a right-of-way area, what happens if you come back with a positive from a location that wasn't specifically in a vineyard?
No, that's a good question. Yeah. So yes, sometimes because of either access issues or whatever, we put stuff in the right of ways. And we do that with a lot of our traps. Um, and so if they were positive, I mean, that wouldn't result, we're not going to quarantine the road. Um, so the vineyard, it isn't actually associated with a particular property, so it's not going to be a quarantine initiated with that. But what it would cause, assuming that, you know, so there would be funding in 2025, would cause a delimitation trapping. Um, and so then that would be dependent upon us getting permission from landowners surrounding that positive find to place traps on their property. Because we're not, I guess we could go to court and demand access, but generally we don't. Um, if we didn't get, if people get permission to trap, then we place traps on their property to figure out where the infestation is. And if not, then we'll trap around their property.
You won't initiate any treatment plans right away. So if you say you find a positive this year in a right of way near a vineyard, you won't initially start a treatment plan in the following year. It'll
Well, we
just
would
go to,
certainly notify all the growers in the surrounding area and also, in the process of also trying to get access to place traps and let them know that of the positive find. And then while we might begin discussions about treatments, we would encourage them to treat themselves in the next year.
and the legislative money that's been made available to the Oregon industry, if they treat, they can be reimbursed for that. Is that correct?
Well, only if they're quarantined is the way it's been approached so far.
And another process, so that I get that question a lot. And the process of being quarantined means that the Oregon Department of Agriculture knows about it because the flow through of the funding is through ODA. It's not through any other source. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So they would have to be, yeah, for them to be quarantined, that would mean that we have to know that they're infested. So yeah. And it depends.
Okay.
I mean, if we have, we'll have to see how the budget's going in 2025. If it looks like we're really flush with funds, maybe we'll do any positive site that doesn't have to be quarantined, but I don't know. We'll see. We have a little bit of flexibility possibly there.
So there's a number of questions here about organic vineyards. So if an organic vineyard is quarantined, how would how would you approach the treatment? Would Movento still be used? Would they have to go away from their organic certification for that year or multiple years?
I mean, I think it hasn't happened yet, fortunately. I mean, I imagine this would be a time when we would sit down with UOSU folks and maybe discuss if there were any other viable management options. Because at least at this time, I don't know anything that's that effective. So I guess we'd have to decide, if it was adjacent to the known infestations, it would depend somewhat where it was. If it was one site in a new county, maybe I don't know. I feel like that would be something that the community would have to discuss, and we'd have to figure out if
Just
we
a
thought we had
question
good
about
enough options.
the treatment, Josh. Just remind me, sorry. So basically at the moment, you are doing a Movento application at around 6 inches in spring, one application, and then there is mating disruption in addition as well, right? So we've got two ways of dealing with the problem, and one of them, I think, and just remind me if I'm wrong, the mating disruption does qualify as organic, doesn't it?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, I do believe it does.
So that would leave at least one methodology to use, and then you could use, there are other range of other compounds. One would just have to talk a little bit about which of those compounds would be most suitable, I guess. Something like that.
Yeah, I
In
think we would figure something out. But
yeah.
I guess I just haven't heard anything that's been identified as being as in an organic realm as effective as Movento is.
Patty, do you know what percentage organic vineyards or biodynamic vineyards here in Oregon or Alexander? I don't know. I'm
So
just
in
curious.
terms of well, so we have not that many actually certified vineyards. The percentage is pretty low, but we have quite a few that are electing to be organic without certification. And so ultimately those, that becomes more of a will to manage in a certain way. It's not a regulatory concern. Of course, if they are biodynamic, that means they have to follow the organic treatment rules. Because they use the National Organic Program list for their chemical control products. So, um, I think that's something that we get the questions about all the time. It's not 50% of the industry growing organic certified, but there's going to be a lot of people not wanting to use synthetic insecticides.
So I guess that question was asked because of the fact that we have such a large number of fraction of growers. So I guess we need to really think about that and work towards looking at, what would the alternative be if it's a reasonable fraction. Statistically, there is a pretty good chance that you'll find vine mealybug in an organic or biodynamic vineyard at some or another stage. And I guess then there'll have to be a plan in place.
I'm just putting a few comments here in for a few of the questions. So another question that is, so is there any discussion about alternatives to Movento so that one could rotate products in order to delay resistance development? And this would be for no more than just vine mealybug, because the same products that are used for vine mealybug are also used for other mealybugs. So Vaughn, is that a question you wanna tackle?
Well, the person who asked the question is Alexander Butcher, who's the PhD student in my lab, who is looking at the alternatives. And those alternatives would most likely include, at this stage, looking at nematodes, potentially fungi as well. And Alexander's data to date is the data looks really strong in terms of control levels in the lab, very different than field. There are some advancements in terms of improving nematodes. Biggest shortcoming of nematodes and fungi is weather related. You do need to protect against desiccation and UV breakdown as well. And so that's basically what Alexander is looking at this stage.
Yeah, and I guess looking from our point of view, if we're looking at still containing the spread, I mean, we're going to push probably to have things that really strongly suppress. Um, I mean, I don't know. My impression of the biocontrol agents and things like that is that, looking at California, at least that what I understand from California is that even in the presence of biocontrol agents, they still end up doing treatments. So I don't know that it was suppressed to the point where you'd feel like you weren't at risk of spreading it around. The same as, say, a Movento treatment where you probably really crashed the population. And so in that case, you know, when as we start to look into the longer term, I guess we should look into what rotation options there are. But while we're looking at kind of assessing and containing, I guess I would think we'd want to stick to things that were pretty known to be good control agents.
So what Josh was saying about biocontrol, there's been a lot of work done on biocontrol in the South African industry. They built an insectary and funded research on biocontrol for close to 30 years. And in California, very similar biocontrol agents were imported. However, and yes, you do get very high levels of parasitism later in the season, but the crop is affected and the insects are still moving around. So when you have a quarantine insect, or sorry, when you have a vector insect that is also vectoring a virus, biocontrol contributes, but it's never going to be a standalone. It's it's uh, it's just one of those additional tools that one can use, and it can be kind of expensive as well, dependent on where you're sourcing your biocontrol agents from itself. So that's it. It looks as if, yeah, I think that's it that I have at this stage.
Okay, thanks, Vaughn. So one of the questions, I think this is a really good one. Rick Hilton asked if Gill's mealybug has been found outside of Jackson County. And I think, Josh, you said it's only in Jackson County at this point, or have you confirmed it elsewhere?
Yeah, it's only known to be established in Jackson County. We have intercepted it in nursery material from California before, but that's not known to be established anywhere else, no.
Okay, and the next question is, and only the vine mealybug male has been found so far. You haven't found any crawlers at any of the locations, female crawlers.
Correct.
So like the picture everybody sees with the target on it, that's the female. That one hasn't been found in, at least for his vine mealybug in any of the vineyards. So
No.
is
And
that
at
a
least,
good sign? I hope it's a good sign, that means.
yeah, I mean, at least I don't remember where I even had gotten the information from. I actually thought maybe it was Rick, that we had talked about, at what point do you start to see females in the field? And it was at least the thing that I'd been made to understand is that once the traps are catching over 1,000 per trap, then you can start seeing the females in the field. And so in general, our trapping number has been far below that, which is good. But yeah, we have not seen any females in the field yet.
That's good news. So next question, in regards to sanitizing pumice, is there a protocol for transporting the material to a landfill?
No, it would be like moving the grapes. I think we would just ask that it was maybe covered and that would be about it. Because there shouldn't be a lot of host material around a landfill.
I think the bigger questions that typically come in, at least in recent years, have been with wineries who want to take their pumice or other refuse. If they're doing destemming before they're making wine, is what to do with what they normally would just put out there in a compost pile or throw directly in the vineyard. So there are some best management practices around handling that compost or pumice if you're keeping it on site or near vineyards, if you have a known infestation of mealybugs. And this would be whether it's vine mealybug or other mealybugs, not just vine mealybug. So we've got some of that included in our extension guides and other resources online about that.
Yeah, and that reminds me, we have got questions about composting. And I think we could be okay with composting it if it was sent to a facility that was really strictly, it would have to be a certified facility that was, actively managing and monitoring their compost piles and getting it to certain the target temperatures that they need to get things to. It can't just be somebody's doing it on their own. It would have to be a certified thing.
So you mentioned already that the trapping effort that ODA is doing right now. Can you talk a little bit more about that? When the traps went out, are they staying out all summer and they're being pulled in late season? Kind of just talk a little bit about the logistics, just so people understand um, time course of when we might see results from that.
Okay, yeah, I think they were starting to be placed back in May, and they should all be out now. And I didn't get a list of what counties that they're put out in yet at the moment, but they're scattered throughout the state, trying to get as much coverage as we could and getting in areas that hadn't been trapped before. Um, and so they'll be out until at least the end of September. And so, but over the course of the summer, samples will be coming in monthly. And so some results will be coming in, but I can't promise where and when, for what sites and when. If we do find positives, we will reach out to the facilities that are positive, but that won't be made broadly public probably until late in the fall. Like if it's a new county record or something like that, I don't think we would make that public until probably in September or October, I would guess. And then I would expect the traps to be processed at least by January. It really kind of depends on how things are going.
So I think a big maybe sigh of relief for those who might see a trap out there outside of their vineyard, that you're not going to get a notice anytime soon, but enough of an advance notice before next growing season, but certainly not the end of this growing season.
Yeah, because we would like to have everything processed in time where people can start, if it was necessary, could plan to do treatments next spring.
Any other questions from the audience? I think we went through all of our questions that came in through the Q&A. And so a lot of this effort, as Josh had mentioned before, came about because of really the concern of the industry going to the Oregon Wine Council, the Oregon Wine Board, coming to OSU, and then ODA. So this was a collaborative effort, and it was last year that Dr. Alec Levin and his team at SOREC, and then of course ODA and OSU Extension got together and tried to address the concerns of the industry. And then the industry went to the legislature and got the funding to do this. So that's where the funding's coming from. And that's got a lifespan, as Josh had mentioned. So I think it benefits the industry to take advantage of it, even though it might seem very scary to hear the word quarantine. Really, this is meant to help catch an issue before it becomes a much bigger issue, or catch a new pest before it becomes an issue, really. And if you are concerned about the chemical controls and all of that, you have the ability to get that reimbursed. But it means that you do have to work through the Oregon Department of Agriculture to do that. But everything is doable. I think that's the scary part. People think, oh my gosh, I'm doomed. I don't want to be, overseen. I don't want to have to do certain things, but it's really to the benefit of the business itself, and not just being in trouble. It's really the long-term benefit of the individual company and the industry to take part and actually heed some of the findings from this work. And I know that there's a number of people out there who chose to be proactive and to put out vine mealybug traps this year. So they're just monitoring them themselves. And I haven't heard from anybody out there in industry who's been doing this saying they're concerned, like they're seeing thousands. We've had no reports of female mealybug finds, vine mealybug finds. And so I'm hopeful that we're catching things early before things get too bad. Any other questions? comments? Okay, so can they get a copy of the vine mealybug quarantine restrictions? I already put a link to one of those in the answered questions, one of the top questions there, but I can again copy it again, and that's publicly available on the website. And I'll send that. So that's in one of the last answered questions. I can also put that in the chat box. Josh, is there any other kind of link that that everybody should know about for the quarantine? Because one of the top things when you go to that website, in fact, maybe that's what I'll do, is I'll just open it up and show people.
You do me to stop sharing?
Yeah, that would be good. I can share there. So everybody should be seeing, this is the link that I sent everybody. It says a grape quarantine here at the top, and it's right at the top is the vine mealybug. And so everything that Josh talked about is right there. You know, what actions has ODA taken? Do you think you have found vine mealybug? There's a reporting database that's, you know, ultimately you don't have to report it there, but you can. There's resources. There's resources for managing. And so all of that is located right at the top of the page for the Oregon grape quarantine. So I put that link to that website in both the Q&A and the chat box if anybody wants to save that link. See if there's any other questions. So one of the questions that came up in the chat box, and I think you addressed this a little bit, Vaughn, was perhaps a release of beneficial insects in organic sites would suffice. Do you think that would be a good plan at this point, or are there any beneficial insects that are available? Like for example, I know people were talking about the vine mealybug destroyer or mealybug destroyer. Is that something that people can release in Oregon?
Actually, I don't remember what that species is. There is an approved an Oregon approved list that restricts importation of invertebrates to Oregon. But you can apply to have things brought in, or request things to be brought in. So I don't remember if that's on there or whether that's established anywhere in Oregon. I'd have to check. But I don't think at this stage, I don't think that wouldn't be a substitution for treatment.
So in terms of if you find a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how about if people don't have positives yet, they don't see, they're not finding anything in traps they put out. Do you think there's any necessary action that needs to happen at this stage? Certainly we wouldn't recommend using an insecticide, but there likely would not be a reason to put out beneficials kind of to be preventative.
Yeah, if there's nothing for them to eat, then there wouldn't be much point in bringing them in. Yeah, I think the main thing that people do at this time is just being, really like kind of think of themselves as a quarantined little island and be really aware of what they're bringing on their property, or is equipment coming from other vineyards, ask questions, have this equipment been cleaned? How did they do it? What are you doing with your personnel? If you're hiring folks to come on your property, how are you checking your personnel? And ensuring that they're not spreading mealybug or other things. So those would be the kind of things that I would focus on right now. And that's just a good general practice.
Best money spent is placing a trap. And then you can plan from that point onwards, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's very wisely said, Vaughn, is the best money spent is placing a trap because the traps are inexpensive. And you can get them readily by going to your supplier. And you can reach out if you have troubles finding that, but they're vine mealybug specific. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that these traps, you can get them for grape mealybug and vine mealybug. But you want to make sure that you have the right ones out that you're looking at, and it's fine to put out multiples. Because the treatment plan for both is the same. It's just that we don't have a quarantine on grape mealybug, but we do have a quarantine on vine mealybug. And that gets confusing for people because they sound similar, vine and grape, but they are different species. And the grape mealybug we know is here in the state. Vine mealybug we're trying to keep from spreading. So putting out those traps is not terribly expensive, and you can use resources online to kind of look at how to look at those traps. You don't need to submit them to ODA to get them looked at. You don't need to submit them to us at OSU either to get those looked at. You can do some looking at those yourself. Vaughn, do you have any other comments about the trapping?
Alexander Butcher, myself, working with you, Patty, and making sure we have Alexander, Southern Oregon, share some of this information with growers. We will have a workshop, trapping workshop at some stage. Maybe we'll have Josh involved since he's looked at so many traps and might have more mealybugs than what we have in our traps. It won't be a mealybug, a vine mealybug, or a grape mealybug infestation our identification workshop, but it'll be a workshop to identify mealybugs in traps. That's basically what it is. And that'll most likely happen. I thought, Patty, we talked about that a few months ago. It'll be after the season. It'll be sometime in November. So maybe we should talk a little bit about a good time for that to happen as well. And it'll most likely be a hybrid type workshop where we'll have Zoom and visuals on Zoom using cameras and so on under the microscope.
The only thing I would add to that is, like I mentioned earlier, if you're going to trap yourself, I would suggest buying the cardboard traps, the cardboard Delta traps. Make sure you close those ends up, because with the plastic traps, we pretty consistently saw non-target species in there, and then that makes it a whole another. It just makes it a lot more complicated to tell what's happening. Whereas if you're closing up ends of those Delta traps, we have almost zero non-target male mealybugs caught in there. So you can be pretty certain that if you're seeing mealybug males in there, that you are unfortunately positive.
And if you plan to buy a trap, make sure, at least in my opinion, to get a trap with a white inside, if possible, not red. It makes it really difficult to see the mealybugs on those red ones on the inside. So the white, if you can get a white inside, that would help a lot.
So if you're located here in Oregon and you want just a few traps, reach out to me. I've got some extra. I don't have a ton, but I have some extra from last year. And I think maybe Logan Bennett down at Douglas County might have some extra. I don't know if you have any extra, Alec.
Yeah, we have some extra traps and lures.
Yeah, so the big thing with these is the lure, the pheromone lure, and having that plus the trap. So I have vine mealybug ones that I can hand out, probably only about 20 of them. 20 or less, but I have some. If you're located in the Willamette Valley and you want a few, you can reach out to me and maybe connect with your local OSU extension. Because we've got some laying around, you might as well get those out if nobody else has those, and you don't want to buy a pack of 50 or whatever they come in. So here's a question, and I could see if maybe you won't want to answer this, because it's a little bit of speculation, but do you think that the detections in Lynn County, or the new detections in, Lynn County and Douglas County, do you think those are new introductions or dispersal from already within the state?
Yeah, that'd be pretty speculative. I mean, I don't see any signs that they're related to the first ones, to the Jackson County ones. I don't have any information that suggests they got planted material, but from that same place or anything like that. So they seem like they're separate introductions, but I don't know what they have in common. Why did these get brought in around the same time?
Perhaps you could mention how they were found. I'm guessing they were found just by putting out the traps in 2023, the voluntary survey.
So those were part of the voluntary statewide survey. Yep. So those facilities.
Only males, and were caught by just starting to look. So that, I think that's the benefit. It's, you know, they chose to look, and others were clear, but more are looking this year and want to stay on top of it too, just in case we're seeing it in other areas.
Maybe looking back at what happened in California, they never had traps. When mealybugs initially established there, the only way they could determine whether they had mealybugs was do a visual search. And a visual search is one of the most inefficient ways of finding the insect. And that very likely contributed towards the spread of the insect in that state itself as well. And they spent a lot of money developing traps and had specialists doing that. But at the stage when they got the trap, finally they got the pheromone, it had already spread into the Central Valley and up into the Napa Valley as well. So I guess, you know, we're in decent shape because we've got a very efficient way of monitoring for this insect.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The benefit of things taking time to get up here is that technology advances in that time. So I think that's a good point. And one more question: have you checked if the vineyards where vine mealybug has been found came from the same source?
To the extent we could, but so we know some of the sites, but not all of them. So a lot of times, a lot of these places have changed hands. So the history of the vines is past. So I'd say no. I guess we don't really know enough to make any decisions about whether they got sourced from the same place.
All right, well, we're right there on time. Thanks to everyone for joining. Let's give an applause to Josh. Thank you for joining us today, and for Alec and Vaughn for joining as well to provide their support and expertise for their regions. As I mentioned, this has been recorded, and you can get access to the recording if you want to come back to it again or share it with others in your company. Thanks for joining, and if you have any other topics you would like to see covered in the Vit Now webinar series coming up, please reach out to me or anyone else on our OSU Viticulture Extension team, as we'd be happy to have other webinars to cover information. And we do have the Vit Now series on the OSU Oregon State University YouTube page. You can find the recording there. And of the last two sessions, Alec did one on irrigation management. I just did one on crop estimation, and now we'll have this third one housed there on our Oregon State University Viticulture Extension YouTube channel. So thanks again, and have a nice rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Penny.